Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Stepping Up by me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor, who, it's not his fault, it's my fault. We are doing chapter 23 today, and you will not be noticing as many corrections because this is a retake. I recorded the previous one with the Stream Raider screen on the entire time. And I will not. This is where you would have had a lot of fun watching me do this live. Yeah. Alrighty. Chapter 23. Tibs crouched on the roof, looking at the others, and only seeing shapes in the faint light Claria provided. Getting up there had been an adventure. Constant worry, corruption. The corruption in his essence would make a hand, arm. Okay, I need to slow down. It's not because I've already read it that I can speed through it. Tibs crouched on the roof, looking at the others, and only seeing shapes in the faint light Claria provided. Getting up there had been an adventure. The constant worry, the corruption in his essence would make a hand, arm, or leg seize up and cause him to fall to his death. The last time he'd had to take climbing a wall this slow was so long ago that he only remembered that same worry as he'd experienced it on this climb. Interesting. I didn't catch the clunkiness here on the previous route. Last time he'd had to take climbing a wall this slow was so long ago that he only yeah, okay. I only remember he had felt that same worry as he experienced it on this climb. That's better. You know, demonstration that reading multiple times still has benefits. And the wonder once he stood on the roof looking at the expanse of the other, stretching further, you could see it's also a mark of what we have a tendency to focus on specific things each time we do a pass, which is why multiple drafts are recommended, because on each one you can focus on something different. And the wonder once he stood on the roof looking at the expanse of the other ones, stretching further than he could see. That had been why he'd done it again and again, until going up a wall was as natural for him as walking along the shadows in an alley. The wonder was diminished now. Regular Rock wasn't a city, so the roofs ended instead of vanishing in the distance. And he'd seen more wondrous things, like water herself and the other element. A mountain stretching so high he lost sight of it in the mountain, or could hardly see the street and building as he looked down from it onto Mountain Sea. The sea. Arctic had mentioned his wonder watching it, wanting to find out how far it went, what might be hidden there. Tibbs understood that feeling. There was so much of it. There was so much of the world, motion in the darkness. Tibbs focused on it, and moves over. It was gone, lost in the deeper darkness, but he could sense the essence in the runner, along with the golden tint of candy. Except for Muller, the rogues Tibbs had talked with had agreed to help him catch this thief. This thief that seemed determined to disrupt the quiet town. So they take in turn. I think the so doesn't belong. They take in turn watching the noble's neighborhood from the roof. The first thing they noticed was the guards. The first thing they noticed were the guards the noble had walking the streets. mean-looking men and women in armor meant for combat, not for appearing respectable. He had put on his best clothing and walked through the neighborhood to get a sense of them. Only one had an element, metal, and he thought she was Epsilon or Delta. In the time they had been watching, the thief struck twice, and Blazer nearly caught them before being tripped and sent off the roof. He wasn't dead, but hadn't woken since, and because of the Abyss cursed rules, no cleric would touch him until it was his team's time in the dungeon, and then only if the team brought his unconscious form. Of course, they could pay for one of them to break the rules, even clerics agreed, but it wasn't like Tibs or the other rogues had the kind of gold that clerics would demand, so none of them had wasted time asking. But the sightings, along with the information Tibbs received from Harry on the previous theft, told them was that the thief struck every fourth night. So tonight, one of the houses would be broken into. So the five of them were spread throughout the roof, waiting. Maybe the thief knew they were there and wouldn't strike. It was what Tibbs would do once he found out people were after him. Break the pattern, them exhaust themselves searching while he planned. It wasn't like he'd be in a hurry if he stole to hurt and disrupt the town. He finally convinced Daran this thief wasn't someone deserving to be protected, and the merchant had asked around to the others like him, who weren't overly particular to where an item had been obtained, and told him that no one had brought anything that would come from a noble's house. There was the possibility the thief took what he stole away through the platform to sell in the city, but with how expensive traveling that way was, it would take away a lot of the coins that could be made selling value. And in Craggle Rock, if coins were the goal, there were better items to steal, especially from the nobles. Just one book would get him more coins than any painting done to have to away to look at their family ever could. No, this was about causing his town problem. So the thief wouldn't strike now that the flash of fire was brief. The flash of fire was the signal Ratcliffe said he'd give if he saw the thief. It was too far for Tibbs to hope to be there on time, but how he needed to be careful. But as with the other two, he could see he moved towards the roof the other rogue was on. Tibbs was halfway there when he heard the commotion. He wanted to be further along. After nearly falling when a twinge in his leg on landing caused him to panic, he forced himself to slow even more. It hadn't been the corruption, just the normal not landing quite right. But because corruption was always at the back of his mind, that was what he thought, and because of it, nearly killed himself. There was a cry, fire, where he saw a form run away. Then the fire was flaying about as Ratcliffe lost his balance. Tibbs hoped he was okay, and only hesitated a second before taking off after the shadow. The end of the roof approached, and Tibbs' steps staggered, but he forced himself to continue and jump. He wouldn't make it. The hesitation had cost him the speed he needed. He pushed the panic down and thought through his options. He only had one and sent the essence ahead of him. Water formed at the edge of the roof, extending it, then solidified as his foot touched it. He grinned at the solid footing that gave him, and he needed that gave him. Okay, this he needed to stop thinking of it as his water. This is the reason why this quality doesn't work is that he doesn't think of it as his water here. He just thinks of it as the essence, like it's. As much as I want, like, but I need a transition. Yes, this changes. Stop limiting what he did with his water. Unlike corruption, his water didn't make his life difficult. Yeah, I think this works. Water formed at the edge of the roof, extending it, then solidified as his foot touched it. He grinned at the solid footing that gave him. He needed to stop limiting what he did with his water. It could do more than simply keep traps from activating or make water surface ice. In fact, he sent more essence ahead of him as he pulled what was behind back into his reserve and took away the slope of the roof, allowing him to run faster. When the next roof was in sight, he already knew he couldn't make the jump, but kept running into the leap. At the highest point, since what he sent water down at an angle to the roof and ran down it, picking up more speed. He saw the form and sensed it at the edge of his range. No element. Without having to worry about being able to make the jump, Tibs took a more direct approach toward the thief, closing the too long gap between roof with water. They were out of the noble's neighborhood when the thief noticed it. The roofs were lower, but also closer, making it easier for Tibs to close the distance. Only a few roof, and he bit back the cry of pain as he bit back the cry. He bit back the cry as as pain lanced up his leg and he fell. He threw water down, made it as slippery as he could, like before he learned to take that aspect away, and adjusted its shape so he kept moving towards the thief as he fought against the corruption. He was never talking to it for this, he promised. He cursed as he lost speed, despite how slippery the ice was, then realized he didn't have to, shouldn't let himself be limited by what his body could do. So what? This is very modern, but it's the only way. So what if he couldn't run at the moment? He could alter the surface he was on. The water rose behind him, and Tibs was sliding down the slope. Then down the made slope faster. Forced himself to his feet, favoring the corruption. Sorry. He forced himself to his feet, favoring the corruption weakened leg. He was catching up to the thief now. He would have them in a few. They jumped down the roof and Tibs overshot. He maneuvered the water and tested his leg. The corruption was becoming more manageable. Good. He didn't want to see what the mix of water and ice he was using over the roof would do to the building's wall, and keep sliding between them. He didn't see the thief as he set foot on the ground and turned the water he didn't reabsorb into mist. He didn't need to see them. There were few people out at this time of the night, and Tibs still sensed their essence, as flimsy as it was. They were moving cautiously away from where Tibs was. He followed, choosing silence over speed. They were well within his range, and he could now tell they had nothing on them with essence. He controlled his glee. He'd seen Cross take on fighters with essence and win, thinking he was sure to win just because he had an element, multiple. You know what? Well, I don't know, but I'm doing it that way. Multiples would make him overconfident. The thief had gotten away from Ratcliffe and Muller. Essence or not, they were good. When they stopped moving, Tibs continued, more cautious. They were inside a house. This part of the town was newly. This is a new paragraph. This part of the town was newly built, and most houses were unoccupied. They had 2 floors, so it would be more expensive. There were all sort of rules about the houses, and Jekyll told him, but he'd stop them the instant the headache started. He didn't need to know why some larger houses in part of the town cost less than smaller ones in others. He had his team's room, and that was more than enough for him. The thief was the only person within Tibbs's range. Circled the house and studying it. No essence, so no magical defense, but that left plenty of noble ones. Tested his leg, the corruption was back to the normal throb, then slowly climbed the second-story window. Climbed to the second-story window. He sensed essence, sensed the. You know what? That's a lot of S's. Well, long S's. He used essence to sense the inside and felt the string he couldn't see, stretching through the room. He used the essence to sense the inside of the room and felt the string he couldn't see. It stretched through the room and connected to something too complex for him to identify, but it had a point and was pointed at the window. The window opened inward, so he iced the string in place, then made a shim to undo the latch, slipped in, and closed the window. The door to the exit had another string attached to it, this one leading to a small bag suspended in the air. Opening it would cause the pouch to dump its content. He didn't think that would be good. He carefully took it down and used the string to tie it securely before putting it in his pouch. Cracked the door open, and a candle provided only enough light to cast too many shadows from the wooden box that were scattered in the hall. If Tibs couldn't sense people, he would think the thief had half a dozen of them hiding. He opened the door fully and looked at the item pointed at the window. There were parts of a bow attached to a wooden beam, and the arrow was much thicker. A latch held a string taut and connected to a lever. It was an odd contraption. He looked at the corridor and was in the barely visible floor, interlocking wooden planks. So many ways the trigger could be hidden. Tib smiled, place he had ample experience with trapped floor. He spread a thin coating of water over the floor and hardened. He didn't bother sensing for triggers on the floor. This wasn't about allowing others to follow him. He stepped onto the corridor and listened. The only sound was someone moving below him. He ignored his curiosity as to what was in the boxes and spread air essence and felt tripwires in the shadows. All at floor level. He smiled. This was easy. Even the first triggers on Stowe's second floor were at varying heights. He stepped over them and reached the stairs. The ground floor had more lights, but also more shadows, from yet more wooden boxes. What was this thief doing with so many boxes? They couldn't all be to hide traps. They would get in the thief's way as much as anyone sneaking in, as anyone trying. You know what? There's no try. As anyone sneaking in. By the sound, the thief was eating, so he wouldn't expect anyone, even if he knew about essence and adventure. As far as Tibs knew, he was the only one able to sense. He smiled and decided to teach this thief a lesson. Don't get in the way, he warned the corruption, then leaped over the stairs and landed on the ground. He straightened, opened his mouth, then was throwing himself to the side as a knife flew through where he'd been. So much for taking them unaware. You're a kid? The thief asked, surprised. What are they doing sending a kid after me? He looked around the boxes, taking out his air knife. I'm a rogue. The man was standing behind the table, a knife in each hand. He didn't have a sword. Maybe they were right, and thieves mostly use knives. Are you the one with the water that was chasing me? Maybe. I mean, chuckled. Kid, I thought dungeons ate anyone not strong enough. Tibs kept himself from replying. The conclusion seemed obvious to him, but if the thief didn't reach him, Tibs would enlighten him with more than words. He stood and threw the knife at the man, who moved aside even if the aim was off. Placed with this knife, Tibs didn't have to worry about how bad his aim was. With a flick of the hand and a bit of will, the knife changed direction in midair and impaled itself on the man's shoulder. Maybe you shouldn't underestimate me just because I'm younger than you. The man looked to be Bardic's age, with long dark red hair held at his back. His face was long yeah. His face was long and his eyes brown. His clothing was light black fabric for ease of movement. There's no or. This is and difficulty of being seen on the roof. With a snarl, the man threw a knife at Tibs, who used water to intercept it. He stepped forward, absorbing the water, and the knife fell. You've been stealing in my town. You've been making the nobles angry on purpose. Why? The man threw his other knife, and Tibs cut it, using water again, because I was paid to do it. Pulled the knife out of his shoulder and threw it at Tibs. It stopped within arm's reach, and Tibs plucked it out of the air. Fucking magic. Why would someone pay you to cause trouble in my town? The man shrugged. That's not my business. Tibs was almost within striking range with the knife, and the man didn't move. Tibs stopped, trying to work out what he was up to. I want you to leave. The man laughed. Kid, you can't afford my rates. Then I'm going to have the guard throw you out. Like they can do anything. I've been acting under their nose and not one of them even knows I'm here. They will when I hand you over to them. So you work for the guards? I thought thieves were better than that. I'm a rogue. What you are is dead. The man flung something at Tibs and flung something. I figure the at Tibs isn't needed. At this point, this should be enough, hopefully. The man flung something, and Tibs had water splashing forward to catch it. Only it wasn't a knife, but a small bag that broke open under the impact, then splashed the man's face with the water. The man sputtered and wiped at his face angry. Then he saw what his hands were covered with and looked scared. With a scream, he lunged at Tibs, who sidestepped. Then the man was on the floor between boxes, writhing in pain. His skin bubbled where the wet dust ran on it, and Tibs moved away, then forward, pushing his essence into the man, trying to stop what was happening, but it was eating away at the little essence there, and Tibs couldn't figure out how to stop it. It didn't attack his essence. But wrapping the man's in it did nothing to slow it. When the last of the man's essence was eaten away, he became still. His face was pockmarked and blistered. His eyes ran with blood, and his expression made Tibs fight against throwing up. He couldn't be certain it was the same thing in the pouch he'd taken. I changed that bag. In the bag he'd taken, but he wasn't taking a chance. He'd stop by the pool of corruption as quickly as he could and throw it in. He didn't want anyone, not even him, to have something that would cause the terror he was looking on the man's face. And this concludes chapter 23. If you are enjoying this, leave a like. Subscribe and hit the bell to know when the next one's going to be. If you want to read ahead, catch up on the story, you can do that for free on Royal Road. If you want to read further ahead, read other stuff I've written, or simply support me, you can do that on my Patreon. And if you want to watch me do these live, including the ones I screw up. You can do that on Twitch, where I also write my stories. And the links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.